Reflections. These snapshots of our members' experience finding NA are meant to be similar to the sharing at a topic meeting. Reflections. When I finally had a moment of honest reflection about the severity of my drug addiction, I'd already been through the loss of relationships, jobs, esteem, credibility, and personal morality. I was experiencing deep spiritual chaos. I asked myself, whatever happened to all that joy and happiness that I used to feel? One night, I ran into one of my old using friends. To my surprise, he was drug-free. We spoke a while, and he let me stay with him that night. He introduced me to recovery. There was an NA group 4 blocks away, and I started attending daily. Soon I was asked to serve as a GSR alternate. I realized my life had taken another direction. I was no longer that same lost person. I went to my first rehab at 12 years old, just after I started doing drugs. Even though I disliked the feeling of being high, I kept using. I used drugs that I said I would never use. I thought about suicide every day, and I stuck a shotgun in my mouth at 14, but couldn't pull the trigger. I was a convicted felon at 15 and hated my life. I used for about 2.5 years in all. I stopped while I was in rehab for the 3rd time, and I still felt miserable. I needed an answer. I was introduced to NA again in that rehab. I'd grown tired of living in and out, and creating more pain. I wanted relief. We read from the basic text, and this time I believed it. I started feeling that I was on a path that could lead me out of my pain. The day I left treatment, I went directly to a meeting. They told me they loved me and they wanted me to keep coming back, and I did. Even here in prison, my life can be peaceful, orderly, and useful. And by the grace of God, I'm making progress. At the end of my using, I was arrested for robbery. Even though I knew I was an addict, I wouldn't admit it. Getting high was the only relief I felt I could get, but it was becoming less effective and producing more problems. Here, I connected with a sponsor by mail. He encourages me and helps me to work the steps. I've learned to just follow directions as best as I can. My addiction progressed to the point where I couldn't speak in complete sentences. My mind was fractured, and I wouldn't sleep for days at a time. I began to take heart in what I learned in treatment, go to NA meetings. I threw myself into recovery, and I got a sponsor who taught me to laugh and have fun again without using. My mother picked me up at the treatment center that had just kicked me out. She did not speak a word until we were a block from home, where she pulled over and said she loved me and wanted me to give this recovery thing a try. She might have said those words every day of my life, for all I knew, but it was the first time that I actually heard her say it, and I believed it when she said, "I love you." I had a glimmer of hope. I'd known that there were recovery programs available and had met some of the NA members at the youth center on Wednesdays. They were an odd group that reminded me of hippies from the 60s. They often hung around and talked with us after the meetings. But it was the readings that hooked into me. Talking about the disease of addiction, not a specific drug, it wasn't long before I found my place in recovery in Narcotics Anonymous. Today, I'm able to look for similarities instead of being distracted by differences. This group of people took me in, and it was like being adopted by 50 older brothers and sisters. The last night I used, I blacked out. When I came to, my car was parked sideways in the driveway. There was a bag of money on the coffee table. I thought I had robbed someone, but I couldn't remember. I knew inside I was through. I saw the sun rise and thought to myself, I'm done getting high. Now what do I do? I'd heard of NA from a friend who had 6 months clean, and I went to a meeting. I approached a guy in front of the meeting place. I asked him if this was Narcotics Anonymous, and he hugged me. I didn't know what to think of that, but it didn't feel bad. I heard a lot at that meeting, and some of it made sense. Feelings surfaced that I'd stuffed for years, and tears welled in my eyes. When I heard the reading just for today, some of the people even seemed happy. I met a man who had a calmness I wanted, and he agreed to sponsor me. I feel so lucky to have found NA. At the end of my using, I was in detox for 6 days. I felt very shaky for a few weeks, longer from the physical withdrawal. In former times, I had written a prescription for myself and easily started the addiction cycle over again. Something was preventing me from doing what I'd always done. I was going to meetings every day, and I loved hearing addicts share about having good lives. I got a sponsor in my first weeks and called her every day. She encouraged me to get involved with service and started me on the steps right away. My brains were a bit scrambled at first, but she felt step work was an excellent way to help unscramble them. She was right. Despite the warm welcome I got in my first NA meeting, I felt very uncomfortable there. I always got panicky in the face of the unknown. Being an expert in justification, I told myself that I was too young. The worst thing is that I believed myself. My disease continued to progress for 2 more years. One day, after a 24-hour run, feeling desperate, I returned home to find the pamphlet, Youth in Recovery, on my nightstand. I was in tears when I opened it. I felt so worn out. I started going to meetings, and although they didn't calm my fears at first, I kept coming back. I grew fascinated by the new language, acceptance, humility, amends, open-mindedness, and higher power. Thanks to NA, I felt I was finally going to learn how to live, and I realized I had so much to learn.